try this. Is this any better? All right. Okay. I'm not quite sure why that regular device is not working, um, but let's just roll with that. So if everyone can hear me, then apologize for that. Um, I guess I'll give you the really short version of what I had been saying, just introducing the session here. And so obviously you guys have found the chat, so that's great, and we are recording. So I showed on the website where the recordings will be. And today's session, part of a series on our winterizing. Really the goal here is before you leave ARM completely, a lot of times you spend several months maybe without needing to use ARM in between research seasons, trying to find some tips, maybe an opportunity to learn and start to implement something. And today's focus is study rules. And I have had a disclaimer. I wanted to point out that it might sound like a sales pitch at sometimes today. Just really the goal of today being a really pragmatic approach of how easy study rules can be, and maybe to encourage people to give them a try is really kind of our target here. So without further ado, we will dive right in. And so really, why is study rules? This will be my biggest, most obvious sales pitch, at least, is why you want to use these. And so kind of throughout today, I'll kind of refer to maybe two different vantage points in general. I'll just kind of put users in two buckets. You might fall somewhere in between, perhaps. But really, you have the workflow of a sponsored study where there is a sponsor who plans the experiment and then contracts out the research. And then there's also maybe more just in general in-house research, but you may have different people who would plan out this study, and then within the same company, you would have trialists that would perform the research. And so I'll kind of refer to, in general, the sponsor would be either truly that company that's planning out and contracting out the studies, or just internally the protocol writers. So those that are setting up the study. And then we have the flip side would be the trialist, whether it's that in-house or contracted research. I'll kind of refer to them as trialists. And so for the protocol writer, the study rules are kind of a no-brainer. I think that would be the number one thing. Kind of once you've learned ARM and kind of understand what's going on, study rules might be the next thing to dive into, because really they're the best way to communicate requirements to the trialist. There's also some additional rules that allow you to hide information or restrict information from being changed. And so there's a lot of utility there, a lot of possibilities. And I think especially when trying to communicate to a trialist, you really want to use study rules. On the trialist side of things, it's maybe a little less obvious, but I think it still is definitely a powerful tool that you can take advantage of. And really the logic for that of creating rules yourself would be to perform self-checks, kind of a quality assurance approach for your own work as you're filling in ARM. And there are some tools in there, different rules that can also kind of create some consistency tools for you as well to make sure you're doing things consistently. So there's definitely some benefits as a trialist, even if you're contracting out your research and your sponsor isn't using rules. I think there's still possibilities for you to utilize them, and we'll kind of see some examples today of how that would be useful. So with that, I just kind of want to give a really basic introduction to study rules in case you've never run into them before. And the most basic and probably the most common form or example of a study rule is to require a certain piece of information be filled in. And so here I have a trial, and there's a couple of study rules present, and you'll see that there are a couple of fields here highlighted in pink. And that is a visual indication that there is a study rule for those fields. So in this case here, we're requiring that the latitude and the longitude of the study be filled in. And so since they have not been filled in yet, they are highlighted in pink to kind of give a nice visual cue that this is something that has to get filled in. And so you can see, the rule, kind of highlighted there when there is a rule in place. If you want to see the full list of all of them that are maybe in use, you will find in the navigation bar. Actually, I can just pin that down here. Kind of in the bottom of the list here, underneath settings, is the study rules editor. And so this will give you the full list of all of them that are present here in this trial or a protocol. You can have them in either. And so we have the list here, and I'll just kind of explain the different components here really of the rule. And so the first one, and actually the first two are required, and we are requiring that in the site description editor, you'll find the latitude of the lower left corner and the longitude of the lower left corner. So we're requiring that those are filled in. And the condition, that's really, when does the rule kick in? And so in a lot of cases, that's tied to your trial status field. And so in this case, once the trial status is moved to established, then this rule kicks in. So, from a logistics standpoint, before anything actually happens in the trial, you might not know the GPS coordinates, but once it's been established and we have a location, very clearly, then you should know the GPS coordinates. But maybe if we were requiring some details on the crop, like the planting date, well, if I'm just being told now what we're going to accomplish, I probably don't have a planting date yet. So maybe the condition could be a little bit later status. The column and treatment line kind of depends on the rule here. In this case, we're in the site description, so it doesn't really apply. You will notice here in our third item here, we're recommending that in the assessment data, the rating date be filled in. And that condition is with assessment data. So of course, you wouldn't have a rating date until you filled in the data. So again, the rule doesn't kick in until data is entered. So in this case, since we are in the assessment data editor, you can define specific columns. So if you only want this rule to apply to certain columns that you've defined, you can do that there. Same thing for the treatments editor. If you were requiring or locking down some confidential information, you can hide information in the treatments editor. You could choose specific treatment lines that the rule applies to. And then finally, permission to edit rule. That really is, kind of defining who can change this rule. And so everyone in my company is probably the best option. You really, in general, when you're adding these rules, you don't want to allow just anyone to change them. Otherwise, there's not a whole lot of enforcement. If you're the sponsor sending it on to the trialist, and the trialist, I don't really want to have to deal with that one. I could just remove it. So typically, the permission is set just within the company of the person setting up that rule. So that way, it can't just be avoided later on, essentially. So kind of summarize that here, but it's maybe a little easier to visualize actually in the editor. But again, that rule ID is really the name of the study rule. Editor and field just tells you the location. The condition, that is how the rule is applied, and kind of depending on the study rule that you're using, there's some different options there. Again, column and treatment line tells you which places that rule will apply to, and the permissions is who can modify the rule. So we saw the set of rules there, and so there is a tool then, once you've kind of picked out what rules are important to you and what you want to apply, you can create what's called a rule set. So that way you're not really implementing this for every single study that you see, that you have to go in and pick which fields are important to you. But instead, it can be really a one-time process to go through and decide, okay, these fields are important. We really want to apply these kind of rules for our study. Then you can save that list that you cultivate. And so really that creates a standardization. So you're kind of using that same set, that same list each time, and automates it, of course. So you're not just having to go through by hand with each and every study, picking out and filling in that table. And so, kind of an important part of that rule set to understand is that the rules are additive. So you can continue to put on more than one set if you wish, and they cannot be contradictory. So, for example, you start out requiring the GPS coordinates, kind of like we saw in that study, which means you absolutely have to fill them in. And then maybe if you set up a secondary set that includes only recommending the GPS, that's in a way less strict. So recommending something be filled in doesn't trigger an error when you go to validate. It just gives a warning. So it's not something that absolutely has to be done, but it's just kind of a lighter form of communicating that this information is important if you have it. And so essentially, we don't want to set up a loophole where somebody can just, well, I'll add a separate rule that only recommends this certain information. So that way I don't actually have to fill it in. We don't allow that. We don't want that situation to happen. So if you loaded these two sets on top of each other, you get a longer list of whatever items are in both of those sets, but you cannot contradict each other. So then in this case, from that set 2, the recommended rule won't actually get loaded because there's already a more strict version of those GPS coordinates. So in the end, you end up with one that's just required. And so we'll kind of demonstrate here creating the rule set and or filling in the list of rules, and then also creating the set. And so that'll kind of help maybe visualize this a little bit as well. So essentially, here we have our trial, and we've got a few rules already applied. But kind of a tip and a trick to setting this up is not to necessarily sit here on this editor and say, okay, well, what kind of information do I want to fill in? Let's start with the treatments editor. And looking at this list, it's not very easy to use. As far as creating more rules on this editor. Really the best thing to do is, let me just delete this one out, is to open up a trial. I would recommend maybe one of last year's trials that just got completed. Open up a trial and you can just kind of walk through each of the editors. So maybe we'll start with the treatments editor and think to ourselves, okay, what information here am I going to need the trialist to fill in that maybe I didn't fill in myself? If I'm the sponsor planning this out, that I'm going to need them to fill in. Treatments editor might not be tons of information there. A lot of that is sent in from the design. Not a lot of changes there, but go into the site description and say, what type of information are we always asking for? If you're a sponsor getting interim results, and I have to keep reminding the contractor, please fill in this information, like GPS coordinates are kind of an obvious one there. Maybe you would prefer the GPS accuracy, but not necessarily demand it. The easiest way is simply to click into the field that you want to add the rule for and right click. And the very bottom section of the right click editor is related to study rules. And so here we can require, in our case, maybe we want to recommend the GPS accuracy. I don't want to make them fill it in case they don't have it, but it sure would be nice if they would fill it in. So I'm going to recommend, and this is the trial status here. So you can see each of the trial status, whether it's at setup, established, whether they've set it to the interim results or final results, excuse me, final results, or it's been reviewed, reported, and archived. And so again, that's just kind of logically, at what point in time would they know this information? We don't necessarily want to require it too early on in the study, but I think in this case, if they're filling in the GPS coordinates when it's established, it would make sense to also recommend that they fill that in. And so that adds, you'll see a blue color here. And so that is the color associated with the recommended rule. And you'll also notice on that study rules editor, that list here, now we have another item in our list that we just added. So it's a lot faster and a lot more intuitive just to be going through a trial as opposed to filling it in on the editor. So again, kind of one of the reasons why this is a timely thing, I think, is to you have all those pain points and we just haven't kept having to ask for this information and whatever. You kind of have that experience, and it's pretty fresh as to what information was needed, what information is easy to forget. If you're the trialist, it kind of goes the other direction too. I kept forgetting to put in this information in my studies, and the sponsor was asking for it back. All of that's kind of fresh right now, as opposed to next spring when you start to plan out or start to work on the study. A little harder to remember that. So kind of take advantage of the experience of this year to build that list. And again, you can just go through each section of your study and just keep right-clicking on information like, oh yeah, planting date. I always want to fill in the planting date. And that one time, I had all my calculations were off because I forgot to put in the planting date or whatever. Go ahead and just require that. I need to do that. Probably, well, I know that right when I establish the study, or maybe when I have interim results. So maybe I'll choose that one and really just kind of go through a study to build that list up of the ones that are important. And so once you kind of get done with that, and you'll notice that in that case, I actually did have it already filled in. And of course, if you're in a trial from last year, probably all of that important information is filled in. In this workflow, it really doesn't matter. So this didn't highlight when we added that rule, only because there was already information here. But that didn't change the fact that here in the study rules, we still have that rule applied. ARM just isn't highlighting it because that rule has been fulfilled, if you will. We have information in there. So, and just be aware that it's not that the rule didn't get created or something went wrong. You can always cross-check with this list to see, oh yeah, that information is filled in already, so it didn't highlight it. But once you've kind of cultivated your list of everything that's important, then the way to create that set and save it for use again is at the bottom of the editor. There's a button to save rule set. And if you've worked with report sets, if you've worked with views, really any of those features in ARM, this is kind of the same process. We're really bundling up the selections, the options, the actions that we've performed. In this case, creating that list of rules, and we are saving it so that way we can use it again and again. And so a rule set has a file extension .rls. Doesn't really matter. ARM will know that that's a rule set, and anytime you load a rule set, we'll see just those files. So the extension itself doesn't really matter, and it will be saved on your computer. So this is kind of the magic folder, if you will, that most of these types of customizations and files that you would save get saved to. And the nice thing is these are just little binary files. They're really, really small in size. And so you can save the set and you can even share that file. And so it can be really easy to send that to someone else too if you wanted to have them use it as well. If you have a group of ARM researchers in your group, you can have everyone use the same one if you wish. We'll touch on that a little bit later as well. But here, so we're going to take this entire list that we have in this trial and give it a name, and we can call it, whatever we want. Maybe this is our general set for trials. Whatever the purpose is here, you can give it a nice descriptive name, so that way, when you want to use it later, it's kind of clear what you created it for. And there is also a little bit longer description line that you can include to remind yourself of what information or what the purpose of. But again, I think that's a little less important if you give the file name some purpose to it. Then that really helps. And so again, this is just a file that lives on your machine, and we can use it now in other files. So for example, if we were creating a new protocol here for the next season, and I'll just discard my changes here, and it'll be pretty empty. But in that protocol, then we can go to the study rules editor. Again, instead of filling in this table ourselves, now we can load our rule set. So we can see our list. We just created this one called General Set for Trials. There you can see that reminder here. So that's kind of why we had that description. You just get a little bit larger area, maybe, if you will, to describe exactly the purpose of that set. And so when I say OK, automatically that whole list, just like we had it before, is put here now in this study. So it saves a lot of time that you're not having to go through each trial and manually add that, and then you're always having those same checks. So that's really the goal here. I guess to show kind of the additive effect as well. You can always load more than one set. So here we have 5 rules that we applied, and maybe I want to grab another one. So I'll choose this master one here and load that set. And that's just another rule set that I've saved on my computer from before. Now you can see I've got a longer list. Now we're up to 19 of them. So that can be an advantage to create more than one. I think if I was doing it for myself, I would probably approach it by creating a very general set. So thinking of no matter what experiments, no matter what type of study I'm doing, I always am going to fill in the GPS coordinates. I'm always going to fill in soil details. I'm always going to, whatever it is that no matter what it is, what research it is, for sure I need to do this. Put that into and create a rule set. That's just the general. Every file, every trial that I run an ARM should have those rules applied. And then you could create additional kind of smaller sets based on maybe the different types of research that you do. Okay, so for my fungicide trials, there's these pieces of information I always need. But some of my seed treatment stuff I'm never going to need. And so you can kind of create a library of sets to have specific uses. And then just when you're setting up the protocol, okay, first thing, I always load my master. Okay, second time, I'm going to load whatever it is that we're doing this time. And so I kind of did that, tried to mock that up a little bit with these ones at the bottom here. So actually, let me cancel first. I'm just going to clear this set. You'll notice that button there. I can clear that set because I'm in a protocol that I've created, and I just applied all those rules. So I can delete them off if I wanted. So my example here of kind of stacking the rules and creating kind of a suite of rule sets. Here I would start out with my master here. Like I said, this one I kind of worked yesterday on just walking through a trial based on my limited knowledge. I wanted to quantify that I'm definitely not a researcher, so this list may not be very useful, but from what I know of research, I tried to craft kind of a list of recommended rules that really I think anyone could use in any type of research. And I ended up with 17 of them. You know, things like the GPS coordinates. I did that accuracy. I'm just recommending the accuracy, soil details, some really basic weather information, some deep, you know, application information kind of specific for the weather at the time of application, things like that. And so actually, I do have that rule set I posted onto our website. So if anyone actually would want to check that out and utilize it, even if you just save it and load it once and then kind of build from it, I did put that here. There's a link to a little live button here. You'll find that on the home page, but also on the webinars page. There's a handout. I called it a handout. If you're watching the recording, chances are this won't be up anymore and you'll find it in the archives. And I'll just have a little handout link underneath the title to be able to download that set. So if you want to play around with it, again, it may not be most useful. There might be some obvious things I missed, but it was an attempt at just this general idea of creating a master copy, a master one that would apply to everything. And so you get that first initial list, that's my everything list. And then now you could consider, okay, well, for this study that I'm setting up right now, it's I'm going to load my other set that I've created. Here, my example was cereals. So, okay, well, I'm working in cereals. So I've got this particular, has, you know, certain details that I want to make sure to include kind of specific to the crop description. And that's really only when I'm doing cereals. Again, these might not make any sense at all for somebody who's never done research in cereals, but I gave it a stab. And so now you'll see we added additional rules here, 18 through 23 came from that set. And again, they're all kind of just related to crop information. And one tip, whether you're loading these sets or you're a trialist that received and looking at the list of rules, when you click into a rule at the very top, it kind of tells you how many rules there are. It also will tell you which rule set it came from. So if you've loaded a bunch and don't really remember, okay, did I do my I did my master, but did I do, you know, any of the other rules? That's one way to see. So you kind of click through to see these all came from the master. And once I get down to number 20, that one, oh yeah, that one came from the cereals. So trying to figure out why I had that rule in place, or just trying to remember if you wanted to needed to load more sets, you can kind of reference where that rule came from. And of course, if you add it by hand, then there won't be that reference at all. And so that's an indication it didn't come from a set, somebody added it by hand. So that's kind of that would be the approach I'd recommend. It really is up to you and maybe your research as to, you know, how elaborate would you go with these sets. You know, maybe just one is plenty. You know, you just do kind of one type of research typically, and you can make one set that applies to everything. And that would be simple and easy to implement. Or if you're a group and you do a lot of different phases, and it'd be hard to say, you know, hard to make a very long list of things that you always do, because it kind of depends on the type of research or whatever it is. You can just create different sets for each of those. So I've worked with groups who really had a group of protocol writers. They contracted out a lot of different research and didn't do a lot of their own. And so they kind of created that a fairly elaborate set of rules. And they shared it with everyone who was writing protocols, so that way everyone had that, and they could, for a single study, I think they said sometimes they load 3, 4, maybe even 5 different rule sets, just the way they had layered things out. Of course, not everyone would need to be that complicated, but that's probably the most extreme example that I've seen of layering them. So you can start small, you can build it bigger, but that's kind of the long approach. So you don't feel necessarily hung up on having to get everything in one go. Well, should I add this? Well, but sometimes I don't need it. Things like that. It can be pretty fluid. And once you do load that set, so here we had our master set. Maybe in this example, soil really isn't going to be applied. I don't think I really need the soil documented for whatever reason. Since you're the one that loaded that set, you can simply delete that rule. You don't have to delete everything. And so maybe I'll just delete 3, 4, and 5 here, and get rid of all of the references to the soil rules, or whichever case it may be. So you can always work backwards as well. If you have too many things in that master that every once in a while is a little too excessive, you have that control. But I think it would, in general, save time to have that master set, and then delete or add either direction. It gets you started, and automates that first hump of adding those basic obvious ones each time. So I've covered some of these already, but I just kind of wanted to get a quick list of that pragmatic tips and tricks to kind of help ease people into using study rules. The first one again was, open up last year's trial. Number one, just in general, to be in a trial is very helpful to do the right click and add rules. When you're in a protocol, then you don't see all of that information. So like, in a protocol, there isn't a place for the GPS coordinates. There's a lot of different fields, most especially in the site description, that aren't in a protocol. So you can't right click in a protocol to add rules for a lot of those fields. So instead of spending time in the study rules editor filling in each row one by one, go to a trial. That way you can see all the fields that the trialist will see, and it's really easy to right click and add those rules pretty quickly. The next tip is kind of that pairing, that building a suite of sets. Create something that is general for everything, and then if you do need to create more elaborate groupings, you can create and name as many rule sets as you want, and they can overlap. We had that example here with the additive. So if you load 2 different rule sets and they both have requiring GPS, it's not going to break anything. You'll still in the end have one rule that says require the GPS coordinates. So you don't have to worry about overlapping and that causing a problem either. And then kind of the counter to that, I explained that whole workflow might sound a little intimidating. You can start simple. There's no reason that first day of using study rules you have to go to those lengths. I would really recommend very first time just walk through last year's trial and build that list and save it. And that's really the end. You don't have to build a mountain of sets right off the bat. Maybe just start with one and start simple. And then each year you can build it. So I'll start with this set this year, roll them out into all of our protocols or all the trials that I'm running this next year. And then as you go, you'll learn, oh, you know what, this one, we should have requested the soil information. I decided not to include that in my set, but boy, I had to ask for it, half dozen times. So let's put that one in. And, oh, you know what, this rule caused problems because trialists couldn't fill in the precipitation at application or whatever. And so the trialist had to send the trial back, and I had to remove that rule so they could work around it. Things like that. Really, you learn, and then next year you can just adjust and resave that rule set. So an example here, if I, let me clear out my set and load our I'll just load just the serials here just because I'm not too worried about breaking that one. So we say, okay, that worked pretty good, except you know what, the harvest date caused problems for whatever reason. And so I'm just going to delete that rule. And maybe we want to add a new one. I really want to lock the trial name because they kept changing the name and that messed up our system or whatever. And then you can simply just make your adjustments and then save the rule set and just save it over the top with that same name. You say, yep, I want to replace it. I want that new copy. And then now the following year, we'll use that newer set. And so it can be kind of an iterative process to improve. You don't have to have it perfect the first time around, and chances are it won't be. And chances are, as you're doing more projects, maybe things change, and the things you need to communicate change as well. So it can be far more fluid than just to do it once and that's always the same, and that's how it is. And the other side of it would be to use recommended rules. And so maybe I'll show that example. Just to show validation. I don't think I demonstrated that, but I have an example trial here that has study rules and have things broken, that haven't been fulfilled. And so when you're wanting to check your study rules, you perform a validation. So under the tools menu, you can validate the trial. And ARM looks at the list of study rules and checks, are you missing something? In this case, let's see, the first one is the form concentration. That's just an example. There's also some consistency checks. So if you have a unit but no number, or a number and no unit, ARM will catch those things. I use the keyboard shortcut, Control-A. It's the same as doing that validate. As soon as it finds an issue, then it moves you to that location. So now we have study rule number 1 said you have to fill in rating date in column number 1, and I have not done so. So ARM then takes you to column number 1. Sure enough, I have data entered, but I didn't put in a date. So if I put in today's date or whatever, that'll satisfy that rule. And so you'll see those are errors because they are required rules. If I just quick enter to fix those, and the next one is requiring the GPS coordinates. I have some obviously wrong ones. I was keep hitting Control-A to validate again. There's one more error I won't worry about right now, but you'll see that recommended rules like our GPS accuracy, those don't throw an error. So instead, they're just listed as warnings. So these are nice, kind of a nice way then to not be a showstopper. If the trialist can't do this for whatever reason, we're not going to prevent them from validating and saying that the study is valid. We're just going to want to point it out to them that it would be nice if they filled in that information. And so that's really what I mean. Kind of the other side of starting simple as well is maybe that first time, if it's not a slam dunk, for sure they're going to know it, maybe mark that as recommended. And chances are the trialist will still see that, oh yeah, I need to fill that in because I do know my GPS accuracy. But then if there was a situation where I don't know that, I don't have that yet, whatever, then it's not going to prevent them from sending that study back. And my next tip I alluded to a little bit earlier, if you are in a a group of researchers that are using ARM, it can be a really great process to sit down together to create a rule set. So especially a group of protocol writers, if you're planning out, what are the SOPs for, how we're creating these experiments and planning them out in ARM. Of course, it's good to be on the same page. And so it can be a great process just to sit together to say and have one person, open up a trial on their computer and just kind of walk through that process that you could do individually in your head, have everyone do it as a group to make sure, oh yeah, well, I have this one contractor that always forgets this, or, every time I'm running a trial, I found it's really helpful if I put this information in or whatever. You can kind of have that group knowledge can build a maybe even better set. So just a helpful tip on doing that. And if you're watching this tutorial later on and it's already mid-season and you're feeling that like you missed the boat, okay, well, you know what, it's already mid-season, it's kind of a lost cause then, I'll just wait till next year. You can still take advantage of rules. And actually just this last year, we had a group that we were working with and training them on ARM. They had a new user and we kind of included everyone in the training. And they said, these rules are great, but you know what, we just missed the boat. It was 3 weeks ago, we sent out all the protocols. So they were really kind of kicking themselves that they didn't do that. And so we said, well, that doesn't mean you can't still take advantage of the rule sets. So if you take the time to build up that master list of sets, or excuse me, the master list of rules, when you receive interim data back, then just apply that rule set. So pretty simple workflow for them, and it was really saving them a lot of time because they said, I get data back, I have to open up the file, I have to click through all of the different sections to make sure that they filled in the information we need. And then, lo and behold, half the time I need to send an email out asking them to fill in one or two things as they go along. This is a great way to automate that process instead of having somebody open every trial and look at every section and have them remember all of the items that they typically check. Create the rule set. And so when you receive that trial, then you can open it up. First thing you do then is go to the study rules, which will probably be empty because you forgot to fill them in to start with, and just load your rule set. So here now, let me load my master rule set onto the trial and then validate. And actually, if you're not going to be the one that makes those changes, there's a second flavor of the validation, this validate trial and log errors. This will, instead of stopping at the very first issue that's found, it runs through the entire iteration and it will present a list of issues. So here now we can see we required some different application information in the site description, and there's some recommended details that we didn't fill in. So in this workflow then, if you are the sponsor that had this interim results, you can copy this information to the clipboard and reply back to that trial list and say, here's the issues that we found, please fill them in. So instead of having to go through each section of every trial that you receive, you can really automate that process, even if it is mid-season. The perfect situation would be, you're doing it here in the off season and you load that rule set to each and every protocol. So that way each and every trial has that list of rules, and then the contractor themselves or the trialists themselves, it could be internal as well, the trialists can do this validation themselves, and they can make sure that they are fulfilling all of those rules. But either way, then the sponsor can load up those interim results and just run the validation. It can be confident that all of those typical checks that I do, I don't need to sit and do by hand. ARM can check those things for me. So that can be a huge time saver mid season there. And that's really, my call to action here with the webinar is to take a little time now to make that list, even if it's just one, even if it's pretty short. Mine ended up, my master, that one that I came up with had 17 rules. Maybe you have 5, maybe you have 25, maybe you end up with 80. Really the number of rules doesn't necessarily matter. It's not bad if you end up with a very long list. Chances are they're just regular things that get filled in anyway as you go, and they're just creating that nice cross check, that consistency check to make sure that things that need to get filled in get filled in. So I've seen some studies that have well over 100. Our rep that's in Germany, he kind of works with a lot of different trials and setting up different trials, and he has a very long list that's usually some of the things he sends along if we're troubleshooting the problem. I've noticed is very long list, and that's just fine too. Really, there is no magic number to target of how many rules is appropriate or too many. Whatever works for the research is fine. So that's kind of the tips and tricks, I guess, that pragmatic approach. I really didn't want to just go through exactly all of the basics of rules, but try to give some tips to show it's not hopefully not too intimidating. It might sound like it to start with, but just starting simple and giving it a try for 1 year can really reap benefits, and then you can build from there, which is true of a lot of the kind of the advanced features of ARM. Kind of once you get through that first season of just knowing what's what, just trying more things out and building on top of it each other is really a great way to approach it. Instead of feeling like it doesn't have to be a final a final finished product the very first time that you trot it out and that you try it out. So any questions? I ran through a whole lot of information. Are there some things that maybe I didn't flesh out as much as you'd like? I could try to give another example. I can kind of have a few minutes before the top of the hour. I can hang around if there are questions. Feel free to use the chat there, or if you want to turn off your mic and talk through it. And if not, we don't have to sit around for 5 minutes either. But I'll definitely hang on the line here if somebody's typing away and hoping I don't close things up. Definitely hang around. But if there aren't any, I appreciate you guys taking the time to join us today. And feel free to reach out to us with questions as you start. We really want to be here as a resource for you guys. Hopefully, that's kind of a common theme here with our webinars. Want to get information out to everyone so you're aware of what can be done in ARM, and hopefully give you some direction as to how to accomplish it. But we're here. Send us an email if you're struggling to get something going, or having some sort of issue, or don't quite remember what all the steps were. Again, we'll have this recording, but sitting through another hour of the recording might be tough. Just to send us an email and we can help too. So with that, I guess I won't keep anyone. Appreciate you guys joining. If you are still typing a question, I'll hang on the line here for another minute, but don't want to keep anyone. So we will be running another webinar next week in case you're interested. We'll be doing kind of the same approach as this one, but with SE files for assessments. So thanks, everyone.